Dr. Wendy is a leader in digital health and research with over 20 years of experience, with a PhD in clinical science and expertise in health information technology. She serves as an independent consultant and faculty member, imparting knowledge in digital health and health informatics at prestigious institutions like the University of Colorado, Denver, and the University of Denver. So thank you very much, Dr. Wendy. She'll be talking on her presentation is on navigating the maze, regulations as a roadmap to digital health success. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the kind introduction. And I am delighted to be with you today. I wish I could be with you in person, but I hope that this presentation is still meaningful to you as I am participating remotely. So while this conference is focused on medical devices, I'm going to talk just a little bit more broadly about digital health devices. And I can only scratch the surface about what you should know as a startup or investor. And because 𝗂𝗂 𝗂𝗶𝗴𝗶 will be talking later today about investor confidence and regulations, I'm going to focus more about the underlying technology and the infrastructure that you should know about regulatory compliance. Now, as a consultant, I often interact with companies that are so focused on what their technology can do, and they are excited about all of the features and just really focus on what an individual can see as a user. However, it's more important for you to consider what you need to worry about is what is underneath. And it's really what's inside your technical architecture and what your regulatory infrastructure needs to look like. So I hope that we can create much more awareness about there's a lot of features that you need to build into the technology itself that you may not have thought of. Now, as we look at the trends emerging in 2024 about medical devices, there are many different types of technologies being developed, with the number one technology being developed is wearables. And so as we think about wearables and the many types of wearables that exist, just focusing on wearables right now, it's important to consider, well, what are the roles that digital health devices can play, and how these capture significant amounts of sensitive information about people, and they also capture health information that's very private. And so it's important to start asking, well, how do we know that these technologies work as intended? What patient or consumer protections are necessary, and which regulations apply? So while this slide is only about wearables, it's important to ask these questions related to all of the different types of the technologies that can apply in digital health. So to help you start pondering which regulations may apply to your digital health device, I usually spend about half an hour with a company to really dig into their product features and business model. And while we can only scratch the surface today, here are some of the highlights that both startups and investors should consider to help you determine market readiness and some of the design features for your medical device. Now, the majority of my comments are targeted towards startups, though, since 𝗂𝗂 will also be talking to investors. So the first major question is, where will you market your device? And this is relevant because each country has its own regulations that apply to healthcare. It could be health information. It could also be how the technology is developed and what types of certifications the technology needs to have. And so this particular graphic is from Stardust Insights, and it shows 4,000 of the most recent medical device startups. And so you can see how there's kind of a global presence of startups, and it's really important to consider, well, where is it exactly that your users or patients or consumers will reside? Because those are the regulations that would apply to protect those individuals. Now, since we're in the United States, I'm going to focus most heavily on the US, and that will help us orient toward a narrower scope of regulations today. So the next major question to consider is, who is your consumer? Again, focusing on the United States so that we can narrow this discussion. Who are you selling your product to? And because that makes a huge difference in the nature of regulations that would apply to how the data are protected and what expectations there are. Now, this slide shows an oversimplification of target groups because there are more potential target groups, but this is a good representation to consider some of the major regulatory differences. Now, products geared for consumers have very different regulations and data responsibilities than those planned for healthcare or regulated medical devices. So it's really important to start up front and create a very clear business model about who you're selling to. So the next question is about what data you are collecting. So this becomes so pertinent because the regulations apply to data protection as well as device functionality. And as we are having increasing focus on privacy, it's really important to consider, well, what data do you need to collect from your device or an app? Is it identifiable? Does it qualify as sensitive data under the state privacy statutes? Did you know also that some states have separate regulations and statutes to protect biometric information and also for geolocation? And some consider precise geolocation as different from being like regional geolocation. And then when we think about in healthcare organizations, a covered entity is responsible for protecting protected health information, which has its own definition and regulations as applied to managing those 18 identifiers that covered entities are legally required to protect. So the next major consideration is, what is the intended use of the product? So I am differentiating between wellness and medical products in this slide, because those are the two major categories that often apply when we're trying to determine whether FDA regulations apply. So a wellness product is defined actually by the FDA as having an intended use that is about maintaining or encouraging a general state of health or healthy activity. It can also be associated with healthy lifestyle and reducing risk or impact. So it's really about helping individuals feel more healthy, but it's not specifically targeted toward a disease or condition. However, if your intended use, and especially your marketing, is intended for diagnosis, treatment, prevention, cure, or mitigation, the likelihood is it falls under a medical device designation because it has greater risk to individuals. Now, it's also important to know for a medical intended use that it can apply to device or the software. And the software can include AI, a standalone AI algorithm that's embedded in the device, or could just be software as a medical device. So to help differentiate more between these two categories, I provided direct comparisons between each of these examples. So like for wellness, you can see that an intended use might be to support healthy weight or to support weight loss goals. However, medical regulations would apply if instead your goal is to treat or diagnose obesity. So you can see the trigger words there are treat or diagnose, and it's also obesity is a specific condition. So as you take a look at some of these, you can see on the wellness side, it's really about promoting healthy lifestyle. I'm going to pay special attention to the third bullet point here because I'm working with a couple companies right now that are working on mood devices. And so they're marketing to manage stress or improve mood at my encouragement because they were originally specifying in their marketing that they wanted to treat anxiety. And I said, oh, if you say treat, mitigate, prevent, and you target a specific medical condition such as anxiety and depression, it falls under the medical device regulations. So I just hope that these concepts help you think about the terms differently and how different regulations may apply based on the intended use and the marketing. So as we get into the potential regulations that may apply, I want to first focus on the word may, because it's really not black and white. There's a lot of different nuances for the setting, for the intended population, for the nature of data. It kind of is, it requires kind of a complex analysis, and we don't have time for that today. So I'm just going to give you a feel for regulations that tend to apply, but as long as you understand that there are some exceptions and nuances to this. And my primary goal, especially for those of you who are startups in the audience, is to understand that there is no such thing as an unregulated digital health device. While what you don't know can and will hurt you, and the regulatory bodies insist that ignorance is not an excuse. So starting out, when we are talking about consumer-directed products, such as the types of things that people could download in an app store or purchase from a consumer website, the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission, protects consumers in a few different ways. So what applies to every single product out there is the FTC Act. We sometimes think of it as the truth in advertising, and that applies to the marketing. But the FTC also has a specific regulation for the health breach notification rule. And this is that if you collect health information that's consumer-oriented health information, you are required to implement appropriate best practices for the security of the information, and you must notify affected individuals for any breach of their health information. Another critical consideration is that if you have consumer-directed devices, the state privacy statutes apply. There are now 15 state privacy statutes as we continue to create a patchwork of state laws that protect residents in those states. They all have slight nuances, but those state privacy statutes require, in many cases, that individuals have to opt in or opt out of certain types of data collection, specifically opt in or out to data sales, about the nature of data that are collected about them, and individuals must be provided with a very detailed privacy policy that includes all of the details about how you manage their information. And some states also require that your technology be designed so that individuals have the right to delete the information about them. And so all of this has to be built into your business model and your technology to be able to accommodate these requirements. So going on to the next just major category, HIPAA, which we are familiar with in healthcare organizations, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, provides the privacy and security of patients' protected health information. And this is only for those devices that are managed by covered entities in some way. Covered entity is a provider, healthcare organization, clearinghouse, or insurance plan. So when you, as a startup, want to create a relationship with a healthcare organization and serve as a vendor for that healthcare organization, they may ask you to sign a business associate agreement so that you can serve as an extension of that healthcare organization and be able to offer some products to their patients. If serving as a business associate, you as a startup are required to adhere to all of those components of the HIPAA rules that are delegated to you. Now, this contains portions of the privacy rule, the security rule, the health breach notification rule, and the information blocking rule. Now, I've interacted with a lot of startups who say, oh, yeah, we're SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. We have great security. And I say, you know what? That's good. But good security is absolutely not the same thing as the HIPAA security rule. Because the HIPAA security rule involves a complex overlay of administrative safeguards, technical safeguards, and physical safeguards. And so typically that requires a lot of additional testing, documentation, policies, procedures, training records. The technical controls require things that you may not have thought of: more detailed access controls, logs, firewalls, antivirus, anti-malware. And so it's a huge responsibility, and it's no small lift to create technology that would be suitable to serve as a business associate for healthcare organizations. And I have to tell you that cybersecurity has become absolutely huge. And as you've been watching the news from Change Healthcare and how it affected the United Healthcare Group, it is paramount. Many healthcare organizations are no longer just having vendors like startups complete a checklist of these security requirements. They're actually performing audits and visits. So it's really important to become aware of the regulatory responsibilities that may apply. Okay, so the final category is an FDA regulated product, and the FDA regulates those types of digital health devices that we would classify as a medical device. Now, it's also really important to know, especially for those of you developing apps, that software, standalone software, such as an app, can constitute software as a medical device and is regulated as a medical device. And it can include AI. Even standalone AI algorithms can constitute medical devices as software as a medical device. So the FDA gets involved when the intended use is for, and marketing claims, I should say, are intended for diagnosis, treatment, prevention, cure, or mitigation of specific diseases or conditions. And the reason why the FDA applies so much scrutiny is because software, data, device functionality can cause significant harm to an individual if for some reason it malfunctions or does not operate exactly as intended. Now, the different regulations, different mechanisms apply depending on the nature of the risk. And the FDA divides into classes of devices between low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk devices. And so you can see on this slide, like Class 1 devices are otoscopes that just take pictures of the inside of ear. Digital thermometers are good examples. Class 2, classic things are like CT scanners, digital stethoscopes that use AI to help enhance capabilities. Class 2. Class 3 is the highest risk, and those involve typical medical devices that are necessary for life-sustaining capabilities or emergent situations. So I have often interacted with companies, and especially startups, who've said to me, oh, no, we're just developing a simple wearable. I'm sure it's, low risk, Class 1. It's important to know that the Apple Watch has three separate Class 2 medical device clearances from the FDA. 3 for the Apple Watch that we wear every day. The Class 2 capabilities are for atrial fibrillation monitoring, atrial fibrillation detection, and the third one escapes me for the moment. But even an Apple Watch is a Class 2 medical device for the specific features that Apple sought FDA clearance for. So even something that we wear every day can still be classified as a medical device and requires scrutiny from the FDA, which could even include clinical trials. So how do you know? How do you navigate this complex maze? So to start out, here is a website that you can Google. It's called Mobile Health App Interactive Tool, and it was a joint project between the Federal Trade Commission, the Office of the National Coordinator of Health Information Technology, the Office for Civil Rights, and the FDA. They all got together to create a website where individuals can go and answer a series of questions about their specific app. And many of these questions also apply to other digital health technologies too. So when you start answering questions, it has skip logic built into the website, and it provides lots of definitions so that even if you are not familiar with regulations up front, it will explain to you the concepts that you would need to know to answer these questions knowledgeably and start making decisions about your tool. Another great website to go to is called the FDA Digital Health Policy Navigator. And you can find it just by Googling that term, FDA Digital Health Policy Navigator. It has multiple steps about digital health so that you can determine when it might be a regulated medical device. And so try to go through these questions, and it has skip logic and branching logic, so it will help you contemplate some of these critical questions that you need to ask and document to make sure that you're pursuing the right pathway for the nature of digital health you're designing. As another option, you can also reach out to me, and I am offering each of you in the audience today or online the opportunity to get a free consultation with me for 45 minutes. And here is a QR code where you can schedule an appointment with Calendly, or you can reach out to me via email, just so that you have someone else to talk to. So there's a limit to what we can accomplish in a free consultation, but I just wanted to be of serve and offer you some availability about helping to talk through and think through some of the regulatory considerations. So thank you very much for your attention, and I am now eager to find out what questions you have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wendy. So yes, if anyone has any questions.
So for those of you in the audience, this is probably not necessarily the best time to answer specific questions about the product that you are designing. However, we can please reach out to me individually if you have questions about that. And I am eager to answer more general questions in this context.
I'll ask a general question. I just joined a startup on AI machine learning enabled biomarker. So it's digital biomarker.
Okay.
Based on EEG readout for mental illness and drug responsiveness.
Okay.
So you classify the, so I assume it's a software as a medical device category in terms of regulatory, because it's a standalone, but the device was approved long time ago, the EEG machine, whatever. And so how do you classify our algorithm, or at the risk, you say class 1, 2, 3, right? So how do you classify machine learning enabled software?
Yeah, so it's really important to think about what the AI alone will be doing. And is it treating, preventing, mitigating, curing, or diagnosing disease? And if so, what are the risks associated with that activity? It's really valuable to think about, well, when we talk about risks, what can go wrong? And also, is a clinician involved? If a clinician is involved, then it could be classified also as clinical decision support software, as opposed to necessarily software as a medical device. So I would encourage you to go through the FDA website, go through that tool. If you are still uncertain, there are a number of websites on the FDA that either have Q&A with good examples, and you can also request a consultation with someone from the FDA. So when I talk about the FDA has a lot of great websites, they have like an entire page devoted to what constitutes clinical decision support, entire pages for what categories, what examples of products might fall under enforcement discretion, where it's not quite, doesn't require submission to the FDA, but the FDA could step in if they perceive that there was a potential problem or confusion. So those are a few different ways of thinking about it, and I just hesitate to offer a specific conclusion since I cannot speak on behalf of the FDA.
Yeah, thank you. I will book a consultation with you.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Wendy, for that insightful presentation. Quick question in terms of what role do you think the 𝗬𝗂𝗏 or pre-submission process looks like when determining or confirming a regulatory pathway? And as a follow-up, when do you believe startups are posed to take that step?
So you should first identify some of the critical questions that I posed early, like who is your target audience? What is the risk? What is the intended use? What is the indication? Start coming up with those, and also perform internal risk assessments. So then a next step that I like to do is that the FDA has a product catalog where where you can look up any device that has been reviewed by the FDA. And it will specify whether it was exempt, 510(k) clearance, or went through a pre-market approval process. So then you can find products that are very similar to your intended product and look to see exactly what it got approved for and what is the ongoing oversight. So that's a great next step. You will typically find products that are very similar to what you are offering, and you can follow. The FDA actually encourages you to follow that same pathway because it's a very reasonable approach. If it is determined that it is substantially equivalent to an existing product, then oftentimes the next step would be to obtain clearance. If you are still unsure, you could request a consultation with the FDA and provide all of your rationale as to why you believe it falls into a certain category or a certain pathway. And while if you speak to someone, they're not going to give you a definitive answer, but you can request a written consideration. What some other companies are also doing is that they are submitting, just submitting in the pathway that they really believe is the most consistently aligned with other products in their class, indication, risk, and following the pathway that way. The FDA will actually let you know if you have selected the wrong pathway for that. So there's a couple different strategies. There's one more thing you can do as well is you can work with consulting firms that specialize in submitting to the FDA, and many of them will help you create the documentation that you need, let you know whether a clinical trial will be necessary or appropriate, and which is not to say that clinical trials will always be required, but they can be. And so you can obtain more direction based on some of the previous activities that have taken place and really examine your products against the predicates.